This is Algebra 1, Lesson 9.9. We're going to look at using the quadratic formula and the discriminant to solve quadratic equations. So let's start with our warm-up. They want us to evaluate the expressions when x is -2, y is 3, and z is -1. So we're just going to plug these values in. So if I have x squared, I'm going to plug -2 in for x. And this is where you guys have to be careful because you're squaring -2. So -2 times -2 is 4. If you had written it like this answer would only square the 2 and the negative would be out front, and that's not correct. So you really want to make sure you use parentheses. I kind of just always use parentheses when I'm plugging things in. So on this next one, if I plug -2 into here, my y, I'm going to plug in 3, and my z, I'm going to plug in -1. So -2 squared is 4, and then 3 times -1 is a -3, but I have a -3 out here, so it becomes a +3, so my answer is 7. On this one, I've got a negative, and then into x, I plug in -2. Well, a negative times a -2 is a +2. Okay, up here, if I plug in -2 into x, 3 into y, and -1 into z, that's a negative, that's 2 times 3 times 1 is 6, but I have a negative times a negative, so I'm still going to have a +6 as my answer. On this one, I'm going to put 3 in minus -2 times -1. So 3, and then a -2 times a -1 is a +2, but I've still got this sign out here, so I have 3 minus 2, so I get 1. And then lastly, if I plug -1 in here, minus a -2 and a 3, that becomes 1. Now this is a 6, a -6, but I have a minus and a minus, so that becomes a +6, so my answer is 7. Okay, so we're going to look at using the quadratic equation today to solve quadratic formulas, and then also something you're going to hear is the discriminant. Okay, so in the previous lessons, we've learned to solve quadratic equations by graphing, by factoring, and then we just did taking the square root of both sides. Today, we're going to learn the quadratic formula, and so this uses a formula that you're going to have to memorize. It's an equation. So the quadratic formula says that if I have a quadratic equation with an a, a b, and a c, the formula to get the solutions of x, okay, remember the solutions for x are when y is 0. So that's when y is 0. So to get the solutions of x, you take the negative of the b term plus or minus the square root of the b squared term, or the b term squared, minus 4 times the a times the c term, all divided by 2a. And there's a little bit of a, you can sing this to memorize it. I will try to do it. You say it as x equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you're basically just singing it to memorize it. So I'll help you guys with that tomorrow. So I'm gonna show you how to solve using the quadratic equation. So they've written the quadratic equation for us right here. X equals -b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, my suggestion is to write out your a, your b, and your c. So my a is 6 because it's right here. My b is 5, and my c is -4 because it's got a negative in front. So now I'm going to plug them in. -b, so negative, I'm going to plug in 5, plus or minus square root of b squared, so 5 squared, minus 4 times a is 6, times c is -4, all over 2 times a, which is 6. Okay? So that equals -5. I do this in lots of steps, you guys. Don't try to do this in one step. 5 squared is 25, and then I've got 4 times 6 times 4, but I've got a negative times a negative. So my answer over here is going to be, I want to make sure that that comes out right. So that's going to be plus 96. All over 2 times 6 is 12. Okay, next step, I'm going to combine the 25 and the 96. I'm going to get plus or minus 121 all over 12. Now, next step, I'm going to move down here. That's -5 plus or minus the square root of 121 is 11, and we've already got that plus or minus sign, so we're okay on that, all over 12. Okay, we've got two solutions. I'm going to set up the first one. Negative 5 plus 11 over 12, which is equal to 6 over 12, which is equal to 1/2. That's my first solution. And my second solution is when I have the negative sign here. So negative 5 minus 11 over 12, which is equal to negative 16 over 12, which simplifies to negative 4/3. Okay, write everything out, you guys. Don't try to do this stuff in your head. You'll lose track. I promise. I always have to write all this out. Okay, so let's try the next one. So my A, actually we got to move stuff over. So I'm going to move my X over and my 20 over because I need everything set equal to 0. So now my A is 1, my B is negative 1, and my C is negative 20. So my formula, again, is negative B plus or minus square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So I'm going to plug everything in. So negative B, I've got to keep the negative in the negative, plus or minus the square root of B squared, so negative 1 squared, minus 4 times 1 times negative 20, because A times C, all over 2A, which is 1. So the negative 1 becomes a positive 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. And then I have 4 times 20 is 80, but I have a negative times a negative, so it becomes plus 80 all over 2. That is 1 plus or minus square root of 81 all over 2. The square root of 81 is 9. So now I can set up my two solutions. So 1 plus 9 over 2 is equal to 10 over 2, which equals 5. And then I have 1 minus 9 over 2, so 9, which is negative 8 over 2, and I get a negative 4. You have to be careful how you plug things in. This is where people make mistakes, you guys, is when they plug the A's and the B's and everything in. You can graph the related quadratic equation and check if your solutions are right. Just make sure that you remember the solutions on the graph. Okay, so our solutions are where y is equal to 0. That's our solutions. That's what we've been solving for. Many quadratic equations can be solved by graphing, factoring, or taking the square root. So we've done all those processes, but some cannot be solved by those methods. So that's why the quadratic formula is great, because it can be used on any quadratic equation. It just takes some time to do. So let's try another one. So we've got negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac. Make sure that radical sign goes all the way over, all over 2a. So I've got a equals 1, b equals 3, and c equals negative 7. So I'm going to plug those in. So negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 7 all over 2 times a, which is 1. So I'm going to simplify that. So negative 3 plus or minus 9 plus 28, because I've got a negative times a negative, all over 2. That becomes negative 3 plus or minus square root of 37 all over 2. I'm okay if you guys leave it like that. You can't simplify the 37, or you can write it as negative 3 plus radical 37 all over 2, and then your other solution is negative 3 minus radical 37 over 2. So I would take this solution, or if you want to write it out like that, that's fine. All right, now we're going to talk about something called a discriminant. If the quadratic equation is in standard form, the discriminant of the equation is b squared minus 4ac, which, if you remember, in the quadratic equation, negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, that is just what's under the radical sign of the formula. So we're going to solve for this value called the discriminant, and what it does is it tells you how many solutions you have to the problem. Okay, so it's not actually like giving you the solutions, it's telling you how many you have. So here's how it works. If you plug in those values into your discriminant, okay, let's say you plug them in, and you get a number that is positive, okay, If the discriminant is positive, that means that you have two real solutions, meaning if you look at a graph, there's two solutions. If you plug those numbers in and when you calculate out the discriminant, you get a value that is 0, that means what's under the radical sign, okay, is 0. So if I had, let me show you. If I had 0 under there, the square root of 0 is 0, so your solutions are just negative b over 2a, which means, aha, that's the formula for your vertex. It only has one solution. So if you get a 0, you only have one solution. If you get a discriminant that is negative, you cannot take, so if I have a negative sign under that radical, so negative b plus or minus, let's say in this case they got -4. You know you cannot take the square root of a negative number, so there are no real solutions. So let's look at an example. Okay, this kind of lays out again. If it's positive, if the discriminant is positive, it has two solutions. If it's 0, it has one. And if it's less than 0, meaning negative, you have no solutions. Okay, so here's an equation, 3x squared minus 2x plus 2 equals 0. Our a value is 3, our b value is -2, and our c value is 2. We're going to plug them into our discriminant. So -2 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. -2 squared is 4 minus 4 times 2 times 3 gives me 24. 4 times minus 24 equals a -20. If you get a negative number, that means that's what's under the radical part of that equation. That doesn't work, so this is no real solutions. Okay, so let's try another example. Everything's already on one side and it's set equal to 0. So my a value is 2, my b value is 11, and my c value is 12. So now I'm going to plug them in. 11 squared minus 4 times 2 times 12. That becomes 121 minus 8 times 12, which is 120, because this times this is 8, which is 121 minus 96, which equals 25. If you get a positive number, that means it's under the radical, it's a positive number, that works, so you have two real solutions. Okay, one more. It's everything's already on one side, set equal to 0, so my a value is 1, my b value is 8, and my c value is 16. I'm going to plug that in. So I get 64 minus 4 times 1 is 4, and then 4 times 16 is 64. So I get 0. If I have a 0 under the radical, that is one real solution. So I only will get one real solution if I had solved this out using the quadratic formula. Okay, we've got a word problem, and for some reason on your notes it didn't all get put in here, so I'm going to kind of write this in. It tells you that the height and feet of an object shot straight up in the air with the initial velocity of v in feet per second is given by this equation. Height is equal to -16t squared plus vt plus c, where c is wherever the beginning height is, where it starts, how far off the ground. Just note, if the object is shot straight up from the ground, the initial height would be 0. So if it started on the ground, the c value would be 0. So in a particular problem, okay, they want to know if the initial velocity is equal to 30 feet per second and it starts, the object starts 2 feet off the ground. Okay. When will that object get up to, if it's shot up, when will it get to 20 feet? So we're going to plug everything in. So we're going to plug 30 into V. 2 is the initial height at C, and we want to know when will the height be 20. So I'm going to plug all that in. So 20 equals -16t squared plus 30t plus 2. I'm going to move this 20 over, so I get 0 equals -16t squared plus 30t minus 18 because I moved the 20 over. Now I'm going to plug it all. Now they just want to know how many solutions can I get? So we're only going to use the discriminant. So the discriminant, remember, is b squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to plug in 30 into b. A is negative 16 and C is negative 18. When you calculate this out, you will get a negative 252. If the discriminant is negative, there are no real solutions. So there's no point in plugging all this into the quadratic formula and trying to solve it because there's no real solutions. There is not one specific correct way to solve a quadratic equations. Many equations can be solved using several methods. So we're going to look at the different methods we can use right now. So the first method we talked about is by graphing. So remember, graphing is when y is equal to 0. So where on the graph is y equal to 0? Well, it's right here at 4 and 5. Okay, those are solutions by graphing. Now we're going to look at how would you solve it's the same equation by factoring. So if I factored the equation, I've got an x and an x. My factors of 20 are 5 and 4, 2 and 10, or 20 and 1. The only ones that make 9 are 5 and 4. I've got to have the same signs, and those signs have to both be negative. So now I take each part and set it equal to 0 using that 0 property rule. So x is equal to 5 and x is equal to 4. If you notice, that's exactly what we said were the solutions by graphing. Now let's try to solve it by using the quadratic formula. Let's see if we get the same solutions. So this is our A, this is our B, this is our C. So negative B plus or minus radical B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. That is equal to negative B plus or minus negative 9 squared minus 4 times 1 times 20 all over 2 times A. Sorry, I should have put a 9 in here. My bad. That B value, I don't know why I didn't write that in. So it's a negative 9. Okay? That becomes positive 9 plus or minus 81 minus 80, because 4 times 20 is 80, all over 2. I'm going to rewrite that down here. 81 minus 80 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1. So my two solutions are 9 plus 1 over 2, which equals 10 over 2, which equals 5. And my other solution is 9 minus 1 over 2, which equals 8 over 2, which equals 4. Again, we got the same solutions. They all came out to 5 and 4. The only method on this problem that we weren't able to use was that square root property, okay? And sometimes one method is better than others. If I don't tell you how to solve it, you can choose. Graphing takes time, and if you don't do it correctly, you're not going to get exactly the right solutions. This last table kind of gives you a summary of some ways we've looked at solving. Graphing always will work, but it really only gives you kind of the approximations unless you know exactly where you graphed it. Factoring, I usually start with factoring because that's faster for me and it's straightforward if the equation is factorable, okay? The only bad thing is not all equations are factorable. With the square root property, remember that's one where if we get x squared equals 49, we can take the square root and x is equal to plus and minus 7. That only works if you don't have an x term, so like a b term. So if you do have that, you can't use this. Then completing the square we didn't talk about. You guys will learn about that in Algebra 3. And then the last one we talked about was the quadratic formula. It always works and it always gives you solutions. The only thing is it can be time consuming. So overall, those are our solutions and our ways of solving, and we are done.